In the heart of Zambia, within the vibrant capital city of Lusaka, lived a woman named Grace. She was a young and talented artist, passionate about her work and determined to carve her own path. Grace's life seemed perfect. She had a successful art gallery, a loving husband, and a promising career ahead of her. However, her peace was soon shattered with the arrival of her mother-in-law, Ruth, who came to stay with them for an indefinite period. Ruth was a woman of considerable wealth and influence, revered by society for her charity work, but also feared for her sharp tongue in domineering ways. From the moment Ruth entered their home, she made it clear that she would not tolerate any disrespect or independence. Grace, she believed, was simply a distraction, too focused on her art and not enough on her duties as a wife. Ruth wasted no time in telling Grace that her place was in the home, serving her husband and abandoning her artistic career. Grace tried to remain polite, but the pressure to conform grew. Ruth's presence was suffocating, and every day she found new ways to assert her authority. The oppressive atmosphere at home led Grace to question her place in the family. Little did Ruth know that beneath the surface, Grace was not the passive woman she imagined her to be. Secretly, Grace had found a way to continue her art in the shadows, building a quiet reputation for herself in the artistic circles of Lusaka. As weeks passed, Ruth's demands only became more intense. Grace was expected to cancel exhibitions, stay home, and fulfill all the household responsibilities while Ruth enjoyed the luxury of leisure. Her husband, Jonathan, was caught between the two women, constantly trying to please his mother while also trying to maintain peace at home. But it wasn't long before Grace reached a breaking point. One evening, after another exhausting day of cleaning, cooking, and waiting on Ruth, Grace locked herself in her studio. It was the only place she could escape, where her creativity could flow freely. Ruth had always frowned upon her art, calling it a waste of time and resources. But for Grace, it was more than just a passion. It was her identity. It was her way of holding on to the woman she used to be before marriage, before Ruth's dominance crept into her life. It was during one of these quiet moments in her studio that Grace had an epiphany. She realized that her mother-in-law's cruelty wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an opportunity. Grace had a secret weapon at her disposal, the very thing that Ruth feared the most: the truth. Ruth's past, hidden behind her polished image, was shrouded in darkness, and Grace knew that exposing it could unravel everything. But the question remained: how could she reveal Ruth's secrets without risking her own future? Grace spent the next few days contemplating her options. Ruth's behavior had only worsened, and it became clear to Grace that if she didn't act soon, her life would continue to be dictated by Ruth's rules. The thought of giving up her career, her passion, and her independence was unbearable. So Grace decided to take matters into her own hands. She reached out to her closest friends, Lydia, a journalist with the knack for uncovering scandals, and Sam, an art collector with influence in Lusaka's elite circles. Together, they began to gather information about Ruth's past, delving into her history and connections. What they uncovered was both shocking and revealing. Ruth, it seemed, had a history that contradicted her public image. There were rumors of corruption, shady business deals, and a dark relationship with a former lover that had been kept hidden from the public eye. Grace knew that revealing these secrets would not only change her life, but could also destroy Ruth's carefully crafted reputation. The idea of staging an art exhibition that showcased these revelations began to take shape. It was risky, but it was the only way Grace could regain control of her life and finally expose the cruel woman who had threatened to ruin her happiness. After months of planning, Grace and her team were ready. They had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, compiling evidence and preparing the artwork that would expose Ruth's dark secrets. The exhibition would take place at one of the most prestigious galleries in Lusaka, and Grace's friends had helped her secure influential guests from the city's elite circles. The theme of the exhibition was The Masks We Wear, with Grace's art depicting the duality of public personas and private lives. As the opening night of the exhibition approached, Grace felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She knew that this event would either liberate her or backfire horribly. Ruth, ever the perfectionist, had been adamant about attending, insisting that she would accompany her daughter-in-law to support her. But what Ruth didn't know was that she was the subject of Grace's latest masterpiece. The night of the exhibition arrived, and the gallery was filled with influential guests eager to see Grace's work. Ruth, proud of her daughter-in-law's accomplishments, walked in with a smile on her face. But as she entered the main hall, the expression on her face quickly shifted to one of disbelief. On the center wall, in bold strokes of oil paint, was a large portrait of Ruth, depicting her as a powerful, manipulative woman who controlled everything around her. Surrounding the portrait were smaller pieces of art that exposed Ruth's past. Documents, photographs, and symbols representing her alleged corruption, secret affairs, and the lies she had told to maintain her status. The room went silent as guests took in the display. Ruth's face turned pale, and for the first time, she seemed vulnerable. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and Grace could see the fear in her eyes. It was clear that Ruth was about to lose everything she had fought so hard to protect. The power had shifted, and Grace had finally found her voice. The fallout from the exhibition was swift and dramatic. The press quickly picked up the story, and within days, Ruth's name was everywhere. The once admired philanthropist was now the subject of intense scrutiny, as her dark secrets were exposed for all to see. The scandal shook Lusaka's elite, and Ruth's former allies turned their backs on her, distancing themselves from the disgrace she had brought upon herself. At home, the atmosphere was tense. Jonathan was furious with Grace, accusing her of ruining his mother's life. He had always been caught between his loyalty to his mother and his love for his wife, but now he found himself in an impossible situation. Grace, however, stood her ground. She had no regrets about what she had done. For too long, she had allowed herself to be controlled and belittled by Ruth, but now she had taken her life back. Despite the personal cost, Grace felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. Ruth, on the other hand, was left reeling, her reputation in tatters. She had underestimated her daughter-in-law, thinking her weak and compliant. Now, Ruth would have to face the consequences of her cruelty, and Grace would continue to rise as an artist, no longer bound by the expectations of a controlling mother-in-law. Months passed, but the tension in Grace's marriage with Jonathan remained high. Though Ruth's fall from Grace had given Grace a sense of triumph, it had also created a rift between her and her husband. Jonathan couldn't understand why Grace had chosen to expose his mother's secrets, and he struggled to reconcile his love for her with his loyalty to his mother. Every conversation about Ruth ended in arguments, and the silence that followed was even more painful than the fights. Grace knew that something had to change. She couldn't continue living in a house where her marriage was falling apart, even though her personal life had begun to flourish. The exhibitions were becoming more frequent, and Grace was gaining recognition, but at home, she felt like she was losing her husband. In an effort to salvage their relationship, Grace suggested they attend marriage counseling. Jonathan, who had always been proud and stubborn, reluctantly agreed. The process was painful, but it opened old wounds and allowed both of them to speak honestly about their feelings. Through therapy, Grace learned that Jonathan's bond with his mother had always been strained, and he had never fully understood how controlling Ruth had been. However, it was clear that Ruth's actions had left scars on him as well, and he had been afraid of losing his family. The therapy sessions brought Jonathan and Grace closer, but it was clear that their relationship would never be the same. Grace had discovered that while love was important, personal boundaries and independence were just as essential. She couldn't return to the old ways of being controlled, even for the sake of her marriage. As the couple learned to rebuild their connection, Grace also began to forgive Jonathan for his past misunderstandings, and Jonathan began to stand up to his mother. The public fall of Ruth was a turning point, not just for Grace, but for the entire family. Ruth, having lost her social status, tried to reclaim her place in the world but found it increasingly difficult. Her old friends had abandoned her, and her reputation was forever tarnished. Ruth's desire for power had blinded her to the love and loyalty of her family, and now she was left to reflect on the consequences of her actions. As for Grace, she had become stronger, wiser, and more confident in her artistic career and personal life. With Jonathan's support, she began to hold regular exhibitions, showcasing the themes of power, control, and freedom that had marked her journey. The young woman who had once been overshadowed by her mother-in-law's cruel influence had now become a force to be reckoned with in the art world and beyond. The exhibition that had unveiled Ruth's dark past had also revealed Grace's true potential, and it was only just the beginning.